Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome back. Jazakallah khair. Thank you all so much for joining. My name is Tahira, and I will be emceeing the rest of the evening, inshallah. So today is the second day of the TARIC Islamic Center's annual Family Summit, and today was filled earlier with many great sessions. Before the break, we heard from Imam Dr. Hamid Slami, and he spoke on learning from history, what works and what doesn't. So to start off this evening, we have Brother Munib Nasir on countering Islamophobia through civic and interfaith engagement. Brother Munib Nasir is a Muslim faith leader, writer, and interfaith activist who is respected for his knowledge and involvement in religious and current affairs. He is a founder and chair of the Public Endowment Olive Tree Foundation and co-chair of the interfaith organization National Muslim Christian Liaison Committee. Brother Munib is also the executive director of the Cordoba Center for Civic Engagement and Leadership, a collective that promotes service, dialogue, and understanding among people of various cultures and faiths, and he is the managing editor of the online Canadian Muslim journal Iqra.ca. Brother Munib Nasir is a visiting imam at the Downtown Toronto Mosque with the University of Toronto's Muslim Students Association, where he delivers the Friday sermon, conducts the prayer services, and offers educational programs. He is a frequent guest speaker at the institutions where he promotes greater inter-community and interfaith understanding and active citizenship. Over the years, he has been a founding board member of a number of charities, including the Islamic Institute of Toronto, Masjid Toronto, and the Muslim Chaplaincy of Toronto. And he has served on boards and advisory committees, including on the steering committee of the Parliament of the World's Religions, on the Muslim Advisory Board at the University of Toronto's Emmanuel College, and on the Scarborough Hospital Advisory Council. He was also educated at the University of Toronto and University of Guelph. Brother Munib also holds professional certification in not-for-profit management and in interfaith understanding. So without further ado, we welcome you, Brother Munib Nasir, on behalf of TARIC Islamic Center. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So, Assalamu alaikum, brother. Whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa, wa min qalbin la yaghsha, wa min nafsin la tashba', wa min da'watin la yustajabu laha. Ameen. I began with praises to Allah. We praise Him for all of the graces and blessings that He has given us and that He continues to give us at every single moment of our life. And we send peace and blessings on our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I began with the invocation, with the supplication, seeking refuge in and protection with Allah from knowledge which does not benefit, from a heart which is not submissive, from a soul that is not content, and from a supplication that is not answered. I'm joining you this evening from the city of Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. First, I would like to thank the TARIC Islamic Center and Imam Sheikh Imran Ali for this invitation to speak at this family summit and to address you on this important issue of Islamophobia and on the topic of countering Islamophobia through civic and interfaith engagement. First, I hope and pray that all of you are doing well. You're keeping warm in this very windy evening in Toronto. And I wish all of you and your families a happy Family Day weekend. As you have been listening to the presentations over the past few hours and day, you've come to learn that Islamophobia is the unfounded or disproportionate fear, prejudice, or hatred of Islam or Muslims that can lead to violence and systemic discrimination. We are living in difficult times when it feels as if the world is unraveling, and it feels as if our society has become infected with the virus of hatred. Islamophobia is rising. It is rising in Canada, and other forms of racism are also increasing. In this country, we have seen the deadly results of Islamophobia. Islamophobia has led to what took place at the Quebec City Mosque 5 years ago, to what happened in London, Ontario, to what happened a few kilometers from the TARIC Islamic Center at the IMO Mosque, to what has been taking place in the western provinces of Canada, in Edmonton specifically, against Black Muslim women. And while Canada is known as an inclusive society that welcomes people, there are concerning signs of how our fellow Canadians see Muslims. You heard earlier today that there was a survey that was done a few years ago where it found that 46% of Canadians have an unfavorable view of Islam, That is more than almost half of the population. And 52% of Canadians feel that Muslims can only be trusted a little or not at all. These negative views of Islam and Muslims can lead to Islamophobia. In the previous presentations, we have been learning how to counter Islamophobia through advocacy, to challenge the discrimination and protect the civil rights of Muslims. These are important works, and we, all of us, must support these organizations, such as the National Council of Canadian Muslims, NCCM, who are doing this work on behalf of all of us, on behalf of the Muslim community. We must also support the educators and the journalists and the academics and all of the activists who are responding to the rise of Islamophobia and advocating on our behalf. But tonight, I want to bring to you another strategy, which is a proactive one. And this strategy is found in a Quranic verse in Surah Al-Fusilat. This is chapter 41 of the Quran. And in verse 34 of Surah Al-Fusilat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says and revealed, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed that good and evil cannot be equal. Good and evil cannot be equal. Then He revealed that repel evil with what is better. Repel evil with what is better. And some of the commentators of the Quran says that this ayah, this verse, refers to the persistent attacks of the Islamophobes and the idolaters, such as Abu Jahl, on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the early believers. Every kind of Islamophobic and disparaging device was employed to defame the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the early believers and undermine the message of Islam. In such conditions, when apparently every way of extending the message of Islam seems to have been blocked, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam received this revelation: Idfa billati hiya ahsan. Repel or repulse evil with what is better. With what is better. However, I should say, and this is important, that to repel evil with good does not mean to surrender before one's enemies or detractors or accept falsehood over truth. But it means to avoid reciprocating harm whenever such avoidance will not lead to greater evil. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in the verse and tells us that when this strategy, idfa billati hiya ahsan, is employed, a dynamic is set in motion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues and he says that your enemy will become as close as an old and valued friend. The one who was an enemy will become as though he or she were a dear friend. In other words, then your enemy will become like a close friend. Just weeks after the 9/11 attack, 21 years ago almost, a masked man stormed into a Dallas convenience store where a Muslim Bengali immigrant worked as a cashier. He asked this Muslim man where he was from. Then he shot him in the face at point blank. The attacker was an avowed Islamophobe, a white supremacist, a drug addict. He was caught and he confessed to shooting this Muslim man as well as two other convenience store workers who were also South Asian. Those two men died, while this Muslim man, Rais Buyan, survived, although he was blinded in one eye, and to this day he carries 35 shotgun pellets embedded in his face. The man who shot this Muslim was arrested, and he was eventually sentenced to death. This man remained for 10 years on death row, waiting to be executed. In Texas, they still have the death penalty. And during these 10 years, his victim, this Muslim man, Rais Buyan, tried to save him from execution, offering his forgiveness, requesting that the Texas judiciary, the Texas courts, stop his execution and save him. But this Muslim man, Rais Buyan, was not alone in his efforts to save his killer's life, this killer's life. He had the support of the family members of the other two victims, including the widows of the two murdered men. And despite this Muslim man's, Rais Buyan's, commitment to save this Islamophobe who tried to kill him, he was executed in 2011. In those years, this Islamophobe, this white supremacist, had profoundly apologized to Rais Buyan and had become a changed person when he was executed. According to those close to him, he said the efforts of Rais Buyan on his behalf contributed to a change of heart. In an interview before his execution, he said he was remorseful for his crimes. He was deeply moved by Rais Buyan's attempts to save his life. When this Muslim man was asked why he did it, why he wanted to save this Islamophobe, this killer, he said that the Quran teaches that those who forsake retribution, those who forsake revenge and forgive those who have wronged them, become closer to God, closer to Allah. And he said, my faith teaches me that saving a life is like saving the entire human race. Rais Buyan's action is a living commentary, a living tafsir of this ayah. If evil is repelled with a good deed, then your enemy will become like a close friend. So to answer the question posed by this summit, how do we deconstruct the narratives of Islamophobia and reconstruct positive and realistic narratives about Islam and Muslims. The strategy is to embody this important Islamic principle, to actively engage in good works, to actively engage in good works, in civic, in interfaith, and interreligious engagement in our community. My dear brothers and sisters, civic engagement is more than random or sporadic or occasional acts of good. Civic engagement involves working to make a difference in our community. It is about getting involved in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our community to make a difference. It is about developing the knowledge and the skills and the motivation to make that difference. It means promoting the quality of life in our community. And although Muslims are getting more actively engaged in their community, in Canadian society, we can and must do much better. We must engage today in what I call a whole community campaign to enjoying good. A whole community campaign to enjoying good. And doing good, my dear brothers and sisters, is not just a strategy to be used when we are confronted with evil or when we are confronted with hatred. But doing good is foundational to Islam. A believer in Allah, in God Almighty, is not a spectator. A believer in Allah cannot be a spectator who watches life go by. Amanu wa amilu salihat. This phrase occurs time and time again in the Quran, to believe and enjoying good. A believer is one who animates his or her beliefs and make them three-dimensional. Brothers and sisters, interfaith, interreligious engagement is particularly important for Muslims to make a priority. Let me say this again. Interfaith engagement is particularly important for Muslims to make a priority. We are a faith community. We are not an ethnic community. We are not a national community. We are a faith community. And our most natural allies to repair the brokenness in the fabric of our society are other faith groups. Faith groups can be our strongest allies in speaking out against hatred and Islamophobia. And interfaith engagement and dialogue refers to constructive and positive interaction between peoples of different faiths. The moral fabric of our society has been weakened. The business of religious communities and of faith groups is to restore sacredness and to uphold morality in our society, to uphold morality in our society. Last evening, the keynote address at this summit was given by Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali, the president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And he spoke about the importance of interreligious dialogue to first foster greater understanding. And he spoke of the power of the collective religious voices to guide people and to repair the fractures in societies. To expand on what he said, interfaith engagement unlocks the powers of religious traditions. It provides inspiration and guidance and validation to build the social cohesion in societies. All of our faith groups, all of our religious communities share one underlying feature, which is reverence. Reverence, the shared devotion to high ideals. Reverence enables people of faith to jointly affirm transcendent ideals, such as justice, such as compassion, such as forgiveness, such as freedom and honor. Unfortunately, our interfaith and multi-faith engagement as a community has not been a priority. And at best, it has been sporadic since we have been in this country. But let us be reminded that throughout history, This engagement has always defined Muslims. The Muslims always understood that Islam is a universal message, and as such, they were always outward looking to advance and better the society they were living in. Many years ago, there used to be a Muslim Heritage Weekend at the Royal Ontario Museum, the ROM in Toronto. At one of those events, I attended a lecture by Dr. Robert Mason of the ROM, who gave a presentation on the technology and progress in the early Islamic world, a ceramic case study. It was a very niche type of a topic. But as he was speaking about the ceramic artifacts during the height of the golden age of the Muslim civilization, he highlighted the key elements that led to that greatness. He said that wherever Muslims went, they embraced everything that is good, they adopted it, they improved on it, and then they gave it back to the world. They embraced everything good, they adopted it, they improved on it, and they gave it back to the world. I've so far spoken about the what the strategy is and why we must engage in this strategy. But how do we go about getting ourselves and our communities to be more engaged in civic, in interreligious, in multi-faith engagement? Firstly, I think as Muslims, we need to reevaluate our understanding of our mission as a Canadian Muslim community and to restore an important element that has been missing, the universal dimension in our understanding and practice of Islam. Let me explain. Brothers and sisters, we are trustees of the final universal message from Allah. We bear the responsibility of witnessing this message. Yet for the most part, we are living in echo chambers. We speak to ourselves about this message of Islam. We tell ourselves that this message is hudan linnas, as guidance for humanity. We tell ourselves that the Prophet, peace be on him, is rahmatun lil alameen, that he was sent as a mercy to the worlds. And we tell ourselves that we should be shuhada ala nas, we should be witnesses to humanity, yet we are not engaging. In our evaluation, we'll find that we have lost this universal understanding of our message, and we are not clear about our mission as a Muslim community. When we look back at the history, our history, Islamic history, and you read the history of the early Muslim communities, we see that they had a sense of mission. They understood their time and place and what was expected of them. They understood and they believed that Allah had chosen them, had placed them at that moment of history, in that place, to live and communicate the final revelation of Allah to their community and to the world. They understood that they were followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whom Allah commissioned. In a verse of the Quran, Allah Ta'ala, he says to the Prophet, O Prophet, Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira wa da'iyan ila Allahi bi'iznihi wa sirajan munira. Where Allah commissioned the Prophet, O Prophet, indeed we have sent you as a witness, as a bringer of good tidings, as a warner, and as a summoner unto Allah by his permission, and as a lamp spreading light. This sense of mission, of being witnesses to humanity, of bearers of this universal message and values, carrying these higher moral values contained in this revelation, in this final revelation, is what is expected of us. All of us should know that we are not here by chance. It is the plan of Allah. He has brought us here in this moment of history, at this time, at this place, In these circumstances, when there are great conflicts and changes afoot in our world, He has brought us here with a mission. We must know that we are the trustees of this final divine revelation from Allah, and we must exemplify it to the society around us. Furthermore, each one of us must feel that we have something to contribute and that we are here to make this community, this society a better one. We should have this feeling that Islam has to be communicated through me. We should feel that Allah has brought us here in this community so that we can communicate this final message to others. Brothers and sisters, it will not be speeches and lectures and seminars and brochures that will change the image of Islam, that will help us in changing that image of Islam, but it will be our interchange, our interaction with people, and how well we bear witness to the best of Islam. We have to stop daydreaming about grandiose solutions. This is not going to happen. No one person is going to come and snap their fingers and solve the problems, the many problems we have. The solution is up to you and me. Finally, to practically implement civic engagement and interfaith engagement, it requires intentional organizing. Lecturing to you, as I've been doing for the past 20 minutes, will not move many people to get out there and be civically engaged. It requires community organizing. It requires community support. So my humble suggestion tonight is that each organization, each mosque should have a standing committee, a dawah committee or an outreach and justice committee. Then we go out there and exemplify the best of Islam. In conclusion, let me say this. One of the challenges of diverse societies is that we can allow differences in times of stress to lead to fear of the other and to hatred. Unfortunately, hateful acts have become a constant threat to the fabric of Canadian society. And we are being challenged today by rising Islamophobia. As we speak now, this country is in the midst of a crisis in the nation's capital, which is playing out as we speak. The fabric of society is fraying. So my message to you today is that civic and interfaith engagement mitigates against hate. I thank you for listening, and I thank the TARIC Islamic Center for this opportunity to speak to you on this important topic. And I wish you all of the best in the upcoming sessions. وآخرون دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Brother Munib, for that. That was very beautiful, mashallah. And that story you shared was very touching, subhanAllah. And as you reminded us, the verse in Surah Fussilat that we must always, repel evil with good. May Allah allow us to always repel evil with good. And as you mentioned, that ayah is showcased in Islamophobes, so may we be protected. Jazakallah khair again. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. May Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, next up, we will end the evening with our sister Petra Al-Fusi. Assalamu alaikum, sister. To end off the second night of our family summit, we have Sister Petra Al-Fusi on Islamophobia affects all, countering anti-Muslim bigotry and discrimination. Sister Petra Al-Fusi is the Outreach and Partnerships Manager at the Institute of Social Policy, Understanding ISPU, where she strengthens valued partnerships and forges new ones with organizations who share ISPU's goal of strengthening Muslim communities and building understanding. Sister Petra's work includes working with ISPU's large network of scholars and sharing research with policymakers, community leaders, faith leaders, educators, and the general public to equip them to make informed decisions about American Muslims. Sister Petra is a Detroit Equity Action Lab DEAL Racial Equity Fellow and an alum of New Detroit's Multicultural Leadership Series. She also serves as the Vice President of the Michigan Center for Civic Engagement's Board of Directors and as a member of the American Association for State and Local Histories Religious History Committee. Sister Petra has also been a leader in interfaith work and public education for more than 15 years and is a graduate of Grand Valley State University, where she earned a BA in political science. So Assalamu alaikum, Sister Petra. On behalf of TARIC Islamic Center, we welcome you and thank you so much for being here with us today. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Tahira, for her this wonderful introduction. Thank you for the TARIC Center for having us and inviting us to be part of today's program. As mentioned, I'm Petra Al-Sufi, and I will be sharing our experience in our toolkit on countering and dismantling Islamophobia, which I will also link in the chat later, and I will share it with the organizers to share with the audience hopefully today as best practices for countering and dismantling Islamophobia. Before I begin on today's topic, just a little introduction about my organization, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. We're your neighbors to the South here in the United States. We are a research organization that has been around for 20 years. We're actually celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. And we're founded to do research on American Muslims, specifically on the American Muslims in the United States and issues that are relevant to them. Our research is focused on two areas for two reasons. One of them is building understanding between American Muslims and other communities, covering topics that relate to American Muslims, but also relate to the general public. And the second reason is strengthen communities. And this is specifically addressing American Muslim communities. So topics we cover here include American Muslim mosques, families, youth, institutions, and so forth. So those are issues with the purpose of trying to strengthen the American Muslim community itself. We have two offices, one in Washington, D.C., one in Michigan, where we were founded. We're a very small team of 9 staff members. But one of my roles is work with our affiliated scholars who right now expand more than 60 scholars actually in our network. And those are area experts on American Muslim issues in American Muslim communities. And they could be found anywhere around the United States working in different universities. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. And so what we do is we provide research on American Muslims. And our goal is that those who are making decisions on American Muslim communities will make informed decisions. Today's topic is very relevant, not only in the United States, but as we all know, is very relevant globally because Islamophobia is not constrained to one country or one community or one location. I will be sharing here I will start with actually covering a little bit who are the American Muslim community in the United States, what are issues they face and how does Islamophobia fit in and all of that, and then what are some of the tips and strategies to counter Islamophobia. And all of that is relevant to communities, obviously in Canada and in other parts of the world. Just keep in mind your own community when you're hearing today's conversation. And then I would really encourage everyone to check our website and visit in ispu.org and check a Counter Islamophobia toolkit so you could get more information on the different cases that we covered in that specific study. So just to give you an idea of who are the American Muslim community in the United States, I want to start with that piece because I believe it's really relevant to just knowing, first of all, the depth of the community and the fact that it reflects the makeup of the United States itself. and you will also see that it reflects communities around the world if we take them all collectively. So American Muslims here in the United States are the most ethnically diverse faith community in the nation. We represent people of all backgrounds. 28% of American Muslims are African American or Black. 14% are Arab. 23% are Asian, 19% are white. And in this area, in this category, when we talk about white, we're not talking about converts or only converts. We're talking about American, Muslims who immigrated from some of the European countries. And then 8% are Hispanic or Latino, and that's the fastest growing community in the US. This is really important for a couple of reasons. One, you will see it doesn't, none of the other faith communities reflect this diversity. And two, we reflect the diversity of the nation. So the issues that we face as American Muslims are issues that are faced anywhere in the country, but also the challenges and the opportunities are kind of unique to the American Muslim community. We're also the youngest faith community here. You'll see 23% of American Muslims are between the ages of 18 and 24. None of the other faith communities come close. We have Jewish communities, only 8% in that age category. The general public is only 10% in that category. Catholics or Protestants are around 8 or 9%. So our research doesn't only cover American Muslims. We cover American Muslims compared to other faith communities. So you will have the full picture. Half of American Muslims are native born and half are immigrant, but the majority, 86%, are naturalized citizens. So they are citizens either by birth or naturalization. So we don't only have immigrant issues that are impacting our community, but also native issues. A third of the American Muslims are low income. 35% have a household income of less than 30K. And again, that's a lot higher than other faith communities, non-affiliates, or the general public. Muslims and Christians have very similar level of education. So the American Muslim community, again, is not an exceptional community when it comes to education. It mirrors that of other communities. Only the Jewish community surpasses, has more education than the Christian and Muslim communities here. When it comes to issues that are important to American Muslims, they mirror that, or they are very similar to the general public. They might be different in order, but they're similar in topic. So healthcare and Medicare were the number one issue for American Muslims. Economy and jobs was the second one. Social justice issues was very similar to that of the general public. And then when it comes to other issues, like, for example, foreign policy, immigration, those were a lot lower on the priority list of American Muslims, even though they're still higher than the general public. So again, these findings are addressing a lot of assumptions that are perpetrated about American Muslims. There is the assumption that American Muslims only care about foreign policy, or that they only care about, immigration. And yes, they do care about these issues, but they're not the number one priority. So Islamophobia. Our research and the research of others in the field show that Islamophobia is not only a threat to American Muslims, meaning it doesn't only impact American Muslims. American Muslims are not the only one who should care about it. It's actually a threat to everyone. The research shows that a high level of Islamophobia index, which I will get into what that means, is associated with things that are not only harmful for the individuals, but also for democracy itself. So a higher level of Islamophobia among individuals is associated with greater acceptance of military targeting of civilians, which, by the way, is a war crime under the Geneva Convention. There is a greater acceptance of individuals targeting individuals or targeting civilians, so kind of taking policing and injustice into one's own hand. there's a greater acceptance of authoritarian attitudes. For those of us living in democracies, this is important to kind of notice. Because, for example, in the United States, the system of checks and balances, where one branch of the government is checking and balancing the others and making sure that no one of them will have more power than the other. Those who have or who score higher in the Islamophobia index are more willing to suspend that check and balance system. They're okay with suspending it for a while, or even limiting the freedom of the press, which we know we rely heavily on information and knowing what's happening in the government. And then finally, there is a greater acceptance or support for directly discriminatory policies against Muslims. For example, the Muslim ban under the last administration, which is still impacting Muslims around the world, even though it have been rescinded. And then there is a greater acceptance of surveillance of mosques, greater acceptance of even preventing American Muslims from voting or from practicing some of their rights in this country. So you will see here, it's not just bad for Muslims, it's bad for everyone. It's bad for those who care about democracy or democratic values. There is also an association between Islamophobia and all the other forms of racism and discrimination. In what we call it here in our institution, Islamophobia is a branch in the tree of bigotry. It's not a separate or a unique thing in itself. It's part of the family of bigotry and racism, and it's actually connected to them. So what is Islamophobia? In summary, or a very short way to describe it, it is anti-Muslim bigotry and discrimination based on irrational hatred and fear of Islam. It's Islam specifically, not just Muslims. This is really important to keep in mind as we talk about, ways to dismantle Islamophobia. Okay, there are a lot of other definitions we could fit in here. There are a lot of things that we could argue about whether Islamophobia is the right term or not, but for now, this is the term that's being used, and this is just a simplified definition. Our institution, we developed something called the Islamophobia Index in collaboration with the Bridge Initiative at Georgetown University. And what the Islamophobia Index is measuring the acceptance of certain terms or certain stereotypes among the general public. So we ask them, how much do you agree with the following statement? And then, based on that, that's what we measure the Islamophobia Index. These statements were not selected randomly. It's not something that we picked just because we feel like picking, but these specific statements, again, previous research show the connection between these specific stereotypes and discriminatory policies against American Muslims. So it's all connected. So the things that we ask, how much do you agree with the statement that most Muslims living in the United States are more prone to violence than others? I want you to think about these statements as I'm reading them and as you see them here, because and feel free to replace the word Muslim with any other faith group or any ethnic group for that matter, and just see how it lands with you. Most Muslims living in the United States discriminate against women. Most Muslims living in the United States are hostile to the US. Most Muslims living in the United States are less civilized than other people. And then most Muslims living in the United States are partially responsible for acts of violence carried out by other Muslims. So I know here it says the United States, but again, feel free to just think about that in your own context and in your own community and how these statements resonate with you. And if you have heard them or experienced them before. So what does Islamophobia look like in the US? The good news is we're not, the research is showing that the majority of people are not Islamophobic. So on a scale from 0 to 100, we're seeing that the general public is scored at 27 points. So again, it's a small, about a third of the nation, or the third of the general public, but that's still about a third. When we look deeply into specific faith communities, we see the Jewish community scoring the lowest on the Islamophobia index. American Muslims score higher; they score at 20 points. So something to keep in mind, that American Muslims, and Muslims for that matter around the world, are not immune to Islamophobia. We consume the same media and the same information that other people are consuming. We experience certain things that are experienced by the general public. So again, we're processing very similarly to others, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. White evangelicals in the U.S. score the highest at 34 points. So again, we're not talking about the majority. We're talking at the third of the general public scoring high on the Islamophobia index, but that's still a sizable community. The good news is, among the Jewish Americans, they actually were able to reduce the level of Islamophobia in their community. So in 2018, Jewish Americans scored 22. In 2020, they scored 16, so they reduced that by 4 points. So the good news is you could actually counter and reduce Islamophobia. And the bad news is it is inching up. So among the general public, Islamophobia started at 24 points in 2018, and now it's at 27. It's also growing among American Muslims from 17 points to 20 points. So you could do things about it, but it's also increasing in certain communities. The other things that our research showed is that Islamophobia is a political ideology, not a religious concept. We looked at some of the factors that predict Islamophobia, whether it's among Muslims or the general public, and we looked at what are the things that could predict Islamophobia. And a lot of people assume that it was religious, it's hatred toward Muslims, so other religious groups must be hating them. But the fact is, the research showed that the level of religiosity, so how religious a person is in whatever faith they affiliate with, or what religion they affiliate with, just did not matter when it comes to Islamophobia. They were not significant factors. So your religious background and how religious or not religious you are did not really matter, or were not significant in predicting your level of Islamophobia. That was among the general public. Also, race did not matter. So what race you belong to did not predict your level of Islamophobia. What predicted Islamophobia, on the other hand, is in the US being politically conservative, not being college educated, being somewhat conservative, being a Republican, so belonging to the conservative Republican Party, having lower income, and experiencing religious discrimination. And the other factor was being age 50 or older. So these are the things that predicted Islamophobia among people. So again, it's not religious, it's a political tool in a political process. I showed you earlier that Muslims were not immune to Islamophobia. So what predicted Islamophobia among American Muslims? The only predictor among Muslims when it comes to Islamophobia was experiencing religious discrimination. I just want to repeat that because I know we live in very diverse communities, whether it's ethnically, racially, socioeconomic, or sometimes, sects in among American Muslims, among Muslims themselves. We belong to different sects in denominations. Experiencing religious discrimination was the only predictor of Islamophobia among American Muslims. So this is something for us to consider internally. All the other factors were not significant and did not matter. So why is there so much Islamophobia? I'm sure a lot of our the other great speakers have touched on this, but I want to show you a little bit what the research showed. Media coverage have always been overwhelmingly negative when it came to American Muslims, Islam, or Muslims in general. In the US context, looking at the last 25 years, we're looking at the New York Times, which is considered one of the most liberal papers out there. It showed that Islam and Muslims were more negative or more negatively than cancer and cocaine. Okay, so we as a faith community and as our religion were worse than cocaine and cancer. So that's what people are consuming, whether it's the general public, different faith communities, or even American Muslims who are consuming this type of media. And this is, we're talking about a media outlet that's considered friendly with our community. We're not even talking about those who are not friendly and how they portray us. In general, 90% of coverage is negative about American Muslims, Islam, or Muslims in general. Just for those who follow politics over the last 10, 15 years, North Korea here in the US was considered, the most negative thing you could cover or the worst thing you could cover. We were still covered more negatively than North Korea, which was called the axis of evil. So again, a lot of people are consuming extremely negative media about American Muslims, Islam, or Muslims in general. Our research also showed that the majority of American Muslims do not know a person who's a Muslim. They have never met a Muslim in real life. More than 50% have never met a Muslim in real life. So their information is what they're getting from the media. Okay. Also, when there are cases of violence or perceived violence, also known as terrorism, in the one of our research projects looked at the religious identity of those who were about to carry a terrorist act or a violence act, ideologically motivated violence act. We looked at the exact same, instance, the same tools were provided, the same audience. We're comparing apples to apples. The only thing was different was the religious identity of the individuals. Where the religious identity of the individual was Muslim, they received 770% more media coverage than that same act or the same crime by someone who was not a Muslim. Okay, they had, for example, 24 articles compared to 6 articles of the non-Muslim, 770% more media coverage in general. Our Department of Justice issued more press statements using terms like terrorism, jihad, and things like that. So the language that's being used in the media that's covering it is so much more negative than the exact same incidents by someone who just happened not to be a Muslim. Okay. And also here, the reliance on media or relying on getting your information from the media about American Muslims was associated with support for public policies targeting Muslims 3 months later. So if you watched or if you relied heavily on getting all your information about American Muslims or about Islam from the media, 3 months later, it was strongly associated with policies targeting the American Muslim community. Those policies could be anything from military action against Muslim countries, separate and more thorough airport security in lines, revoking the right to vote, and other policies. So there's a greater support for those policies among people who rely on the media for their information. Okay. The last piece here is Islamophobia is not just an individual act. It's not just people hating on each other. It is an actual industry with a multi-million industry that's being shared among foundations and institutions and speakers and individuals who are going around the country with the purpose of spreading false information about Islam and Muslims. So you will see foundations connected to this industry. You'll see, groups who have really nice names, like they're just there to protect the country and protect individuals. But if you look at them closely, you'll see the number one goal for them is to target the Islam and Muslim communities. There are reports that are published on the Islamophobia industry, the organizations in those specific individuals. And unfortunately, it's not just limited to the US, it's an international industry right now. Okay. So there are, different forms of Islamophobia. There is what we call private Islamophobia, which is, assaults and harassments among individuals, people calling each other's names, anti-mosque activities. You will see that we see that across the country. Here in the US, I'm sure you're seeing it in your own communities too, opposing the building of new mosques or the renovation of certain mosques, and hate groups and hate rallies, which unfortunately we started seeing in so many communities in the United States. Okay. Those activities are meant to intimidate and meant to target specific Muslim communities. Organizations here in the US, such as Act for America, they hold anti-Muslim rallies and talks across the US, trying to kind of stir up anti-Muslim sentiment. Efforts to construct mosques anywhere in the country have been faced with opposition, with resistance, and with kind of a playbook of tactics to delay the process. Everything from, from zoning issues to noise complaints to just things that seem like they're very trivial, and they seem like they're just incidents that are only specific to one community, until you kind of step back and look at it nationwide, and you see it's the same process applied across the country. Okay. And some of them have made the news, some of them have resulted in lawsuits against cities, and some of them have, are still ongoing. Okay. There have been a well-documented and widespread instances of also mosque vandalism across the US. Everything from anti-mosque activities to arson, hateful graffiti, break-ins, or just, other activities. And this has been increasing in the last 20 years, okay? So what are some of the strategies that could be done to push back against activities like this? The first thing is realizing that American Muslims cannot do this alone, or Muslims in any of the Western nations, they cannot do this alone. At the end of the day, we're still very small communities. Unfortunately, we're still very not as organized communities. We're still trying to build. So some of the strategies include making sure that we build allies in support among those who share commonalities with us. And there are a lot of groups, whether it's groups who are impacted by similar hateful acts, or groups who are publicly saying we're there to protect Muslims and fight Islamophobia. So build allyship and build strategies on who will be addressing what issue. Here in the US, there have been very successful coalition buildings and successful tactics that have worked, whether it's against those rallies, hateful rallies, where sometimes organizations will find out about a rally coming up, and they'll spread the word and prepare a counter rally of, love and support and welcome for the Muslim community. And the funny thing is, when the hate rally have 5 or 10 people that show up, even though it's still hateful, and then the opposite or the opposing rally will have hundreds of people who show up. Work with the local law enforcement communities to protect places of worship. That's something to take very, very, very seriously. not just mosques, but other places of worship, because the vandalism and arsoning and attacks against those places have been increasing. There have been successful coalitions to cancel hate rallies, to cancel hateful speakers, to cancel, for example, hotels, convention centers from hosting such events. But again, it cannot be done just by Muslims alone. That's where the coalition building comes in. That's where the strategy comes in the tactics, okay? The experience from our research show, again, that American Muslims are not the only one impacted by this hatred. We see here in the US that American Muslims and American Jews have experienced this religious discrimination and religious hatred about the same level, which is a lot higher than other faith communities, like example, the Catholic, Protestants, white evangelicals, or the general public. Unfortunately for American Muslims, this has been consistent for at least 5 years, where 60% experience religious discrimination. This is what private Islamophobia looks like. 60% of the people saying they have experienced religious-based discrimination. In the American context, over the previous election in 2016, fear, anxiety, fear for loved ones, fear for safety was a real issue that was experienced here. And I'm sure similar sentiments are experienced in Canada and in other communities during election time, where the American Muslim community or the Muslim community is used as a scapegoat, or it becomes more okay to target and to speak ill of that community. Okay, interpersonal discrimination or interpersonal religious discrimination in school, in the workforce, from peers and colleagues is experienced. That's what private Islamophobia looks like. So when it comes to American Muslims, 49% said they have interacted or they have experienced religious-based discrimination while interacting with strangers in public places. So, you know, they're shopping, they're in a shopping store, buying groceries or whatever, and they experience discrimination from a stranger they've never met in their life, who will come up to them and target them just because of their religious identity, or their assumed religious identity, because sometimes those who look like they're Muslim, as if Muslims have a look, are also targeted. 42% said they've experienced it from peers at school or at work. So again, in professional or assumed professional places, American Muslims experience that hatred and discrimination. And then the only place where, you know, Americans experience a similar level of discrimination is among friends and family. That's the place where we all could, you know, relate to each other and say, you know, we all know someone or have someone in our family who just is not very tolerant of others. Where to me Islamophobia is best demonstrated or makes the, you know, is the clearest case is among children. So Muslim American families, more than 51% have reported having a child who experienced religious-based discrimination in the public school system. 51% of the families. That's twice that in the general public. Okay. Where it becomes even more clear to me is that 1 out of 3 of those reported cases is at the hand of an adult in the school system, a teacher, administrator, or someone who holds authority. So again, this is a place where we could ask, what would make someone in an educational setting where it's presumed that you know, people are there because they love what they do, and it's not because of how they're treated or what have you, will treat a kid differently or discriminate against them or bully them because of their religious identity. And that's, to me, a clear demonstration of, you know, the bias and the assumptions that individuals have about Islam, you know, Islam and Muslims and Muslim families. So that's private Islamophobia, one-on-one phobia. But there is structural Islamophobia. Islamophobia is not just limited to individuals. There is a system and a structure in place. The structure Islamophobia is a little bit harder to kind of address sometimes, or hard to identify if one is not very aware of what it looks like. Okay, the structural Islamophobia presumes that Islam is inherently violent. It treats that community and that faith community based on it is a violent community, and it needs to be kind of redeemed. It suggests that Muslims are incompatible with the society they live in. That's where one of our questions was, how much do you agree that American Muslims are less civilized, or that they don't, support the U.S., or they hate the U.S., or they should be responsible for activities done by others in their faith community. Okay, there is a fear in suspicion of Muslims at the national institutions, everything from educational setting to military and everything in between. It reflecting institutionalized of anti-Muslim or anti-Islam legislations. In our context, everything from the Muslim ban to policies that were passed after 9/11 that target specifically the community. Okay, it assumes that the community could only be controlled by policing and policies that look at it as a violent community, or a community that could become violent at any time, at any moment. Okay. And those, again, are done at the hands of the state, national and local legal systems. They're at the hands of the police and hands of the media, the media outlets or the media industry. Okay, and the media unfortunately perpetrate or increase this assumption through the stereotypes and through the stereotypical images that are portrayed of American Muslims, or about Muslims in general and Islam in general. So what that looks like, what does structural Islamophobia look like? As mentioned, is Islamophobic legislations, Muslim ban is, for example, is one of them, unequal treatment in the legal system. So I mentioned earlier, how the media treats certain cases. We have similar issues in the legal system too. Media bias, it is okay for the media to cover Muslims however it wants, but there's always a lashback or a pushback when it portrays other communities negatively, even though a lot of minority communities are still portrayed very, very negatively in the media. Anti-Muslim political rhetoric, especially during election season, where it becomes kind of an open season on American Muslims to just say whatever you want to say about them, including American Muslims who are in elected positions, who are serving. It is okay to say against them what you want to say. There is hardly any pushback against that. And then, of course, resistant refugees that come from Muslim countries under the presumption of threat, that they're going to come change our way of life. They're going to bring diseases, that they're not vetted enough. There's a lot of things that are said about refugees, even though the refugee vetting system is one of the hardest in the overall immigration system. What does it look like in terms of numbers? When we looked at institutional Islamophobia, it looks like 44% of American Muslims saying they have been profiled at the airport or have experienced Islamophobia at the airport, compared to 5% in the general public. Okay, every one of us, almost every one of us have a story that we could share about the experience that we received at the airport that was so different than the experience of our colleagues who just happened not to be Muslim. 33% experience it while applying for a job. This is before you even get a job. You're just applying. Unfortunately, for Muslim women or those who are visibly more Muslim, you know, it might be more, you might be experiencing that more. So that includes everything from being asked, are you going to be able to fit in with this culture, to denying a job, not even receiving the interview, and then not receiving an offer for whatever reason. All of these different things that are experienced by American Muslims. Interacting with law enforcement, 31% of American Muslims said they have experienced Islamophobia while interacting with law enforcement. This is compared to 8% of the general public, and then 25% while receiving healthcare services. This is compared to 5% of the general public. This is really important to highlight in light of a pandemic that we're all living in right now. 25% saying they have experienced discrimination in Islamophobia in a healthcare setting. Okay. Earlier, I shared that Muslim defendants received more media coverage for exactly the same thing that they were planning than someone who was not Muslim. Well, the legal system is just as bad. Muslim defendants were more likely than others to receive longer sentences, okay? 211 months compared to 53 months for the non-Muslim defendant, okay? And they were the sentences that was asked for that they should receive was also higher, 23 months compared to 76 months for the non-Muslim. The legal system is just as bad. And this is just an example here because we looked at that issue since for the last 20 years, there is that assumption that, you know, first of all, that violence is just widespread in the community, that we're not doing enough to address it, which is very untrue. And the fact that right now white supremacy is and has always been on the rise, and it's the #1 threat to our nation, we're still not looking at it the same way that we looked at issues where Muslim defendants or Muslims were accused of ideologically motivated violence. Okay. How do you respond to things like this? Again, coalition building is a huge, huge strategy. Educating not only yourself and your community, but others in your space about these issues, and making sure that people know, because most people don't know. We in the Muslim community had a feeling or knew that was happening, but we didn't realize how bad it was until we started doing the research on it. Okay, but there need to be more strategic response to these discriminations. It can't be just one person shouting it out, but there need to be a unified response among American Muslims, regardless of how divided or how we don't see eye to eye internally when it comes to internal issues. There need to be a long, a very clear ask from our interfaith partners and through interfaith relationships. Interfaith work need to go beyond just getting to know each other and getting to know each other's faith, but it need to include and ask for allyship and ask for calling out these policies that are harming American Muslims. Okay, there need to be support among American Muslims to support other communities that are facing also institutionalized discrimination and institutionalized Islamophobia. So in their return, they could come back and stand up or stand with us. Okay, there need to be a lot of work at the local setting or the local communities. Most politics is local. It's not just national. Yes, get involved with the national politics, but where individuals and organizations could make the most impact is at the local level, where people know you're part of the community. they're more obligated to answer to you and to your needs than they do at the national level, where you're just a part of a larger community, and you might not have the numbers to kind of to make that difference, right? I want to close here or stop here with how American Muslims are responding, because this is something that we should not lose sight of. Even when our communities are under attack, and we're institutionally targeted and institutionally discriminated against, one thing that's really important is, one, to keep the faith, to stay strong in our identities and in our faith identity, and to kind of show who we are through that, because it's not only important for us right now, it's important for the next generation. Okay, so how do American Muslims respond? They respond by saying they are very proud to identify with their faith community. They're very proud to be Muslims. In American Muslims, 86% say they're very proud of their faith community. Okay, they respond by increasing the access and registration to vote. Okay, we increased that level, or we dropped the level of those who were not registered to vote among American Muslims by half in 5 years. That's a huge success for our community. Even though it's still lagging behind other faith communities, this is something that we should be proud of. It means more American Muslims want to say, you know what, I'm not just going to sit and watch what's happening to my community. I'm going to be part of the decision making. I'm going to be part of making, change in the leadership. And we have an increased number of American Muslims who are not only registering to vote and voting, but they're actually getting out and running for office, or becoming appointed or serving in different capacity. Okay, we're seeing more American Muslims attend town hall meetings and voicing their opinion and voicing their concerns, higher than other faith communities. We're seeing American Muslims volunteering more for political campaigns and donating more to political campaigns. Why is that important? This is really important to get engaged in the political process of your community, wherever you are. Again, because if you're seen and you're heard and you're contributing, you're less likely to be ignored, and your issues are less likely to be ignored. Politicians and political leaders who see you at their campaign, they see your money as part of their campaign, even if it's small amount, are more willing to, recognize your name when it comes across their desk, or recognize your point of view and your stand when it comes to an issue that's impacting you. They are supporting other causes and other issues that are similar in struggle to ours. So American Muslims are the most likely faith community to support in the US Black Lives Matter movement. But in your own community, look at what causes exist, what issues exist in your community, and what are the overlaps between them and your cause as an American Muslim, and where can you support them? And of course, to while holding your principles, because what this demonstrates is you're not just concerned about your own issues, which you have every right to do that. But with small communities and small numbers, it is harder to make an impact. It's harder to make a change when you're just doing it alone. If you support other causes, they're more likely to support yours. This is just from a strategic perspective. This is from just an allyship perspective. But of course, we know that our faith command us to also work on justice-related issues. Here in the US, we have two communities. We have a lot of communities, but I'm just using these two examples where, despite all the discrimination and the struggles and the Islamophobia that American Muslims face, we're still being who we are. We're still contributing to society, whether it's by, again, running for office, or, having 15% of a state's doctors be Muslim doctors, when only that state's population include 3% that are Muslim. Okay, like for example, in Michigan, here right next to you, only 3% of American Muslim, or of 3% of the Michigan's population are Muslim, but 15% of its medical doctors are Muslims. So again, we're existing in places where we're making a huge impact. Okay. And then finally here, like I said, build coalition with other impacted communities. Keep demystifying Islam. Our research shows that it's not just enough to build allyship. It's not just enough to do interfaith work. It's not just, it's not enough to just, kind of share who you are as a Muslim American, but demystifying Islam actually reduces Islamophobia. Because remember, Islamophobia is a hatred or a fear of Islam itself. So the more people know about Islam as a faith, the more you could reduce that level of Islamophobia. Please join us and sign up for our mailing list to receive more of this information. You can follow us on social media, but I'm going to stop here for questions, and I'm going to share the actual toolkit with you in the chat. But if if you're not joining us in this chat, it's ispu.org countering Islamophobia toolkit. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to take questions.
Jazakallah khair, thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. That has been very informative and educational. MashaAllah, your presentation was great, and you covered so much on Islamophobia, certain trends, ideas, politics, research, and many strategies that are very useful, that can be used in many Western societies, not only America. So thank you so much. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat. Please do click the link and join. So I guess with that, that will bring our session to its end. On behalf of TARIC Islamic Center, thank you so much. Jazakallah khair, may Allah reward you for your work.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope people will follow our organization, ispu.org, because we do the research on American Muslims, not just on Islamophobia, but things that relate to American Muslims. I know I'm talking about the U.S. context, but the information and the resources that are available are relevant to a lot of other communities. So thank you for having me and for having this really, really, really important conversation. And Jazakallah khair.
Walaikum assalam. Take care. Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, that sounds good. We'll definitely check it out. So, okay, everyone, thank you so much. With that, the end of our second day of the annual Family Summit has come to an end. Thank you all so much for joining. Alhamdulillah, today we had a great lineup of speakers. Please be sure to join us again tomorrow, inshallah, for our final day 3 of the Family Summit. We have many great speakers. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., we have a special session on self-esteem and Islamophobia by Sister Samaya Puna and Sister Amina Ali, and the session will be exclusively for parents and who have children between the ages of 5 to 7, and the regular sessions will start again at 1 p.m. on countering Islamophobia in the media, community media practices by Dr. Catherine Bullock. So thank you again. Jazakallah khair so much. You can join again tomorrow with the link, the Zoom ID, as well as on Facebook. Take care, everybody. It was 5 to 17 years for tomorrow's session at 10 a.m. So please be sure to join. Thank you so much. Jazakallah. Good night.